Night. Full moon. A bright white cold light illuminated the rose garden and the castle located between the lakes in which the stars were reflected. Pink shoes and leather men's shoes were scattered on the floor. The dress and shirt lay crumpled on the floor. A red-haired girl was sitting on a guy. The young man's abdominal muscles slid under her palms. A moment and the girl woke up. Raspberry strands tangled on the pillow. A brunette was sleeping serenely nearby. The beauty glanced at the snoring man nearby. Miss smiled. He slept so peacefully wrapped in a blanket. His name is Frederick Reiferger. A strong and stately guy whose eyelashes trembled slightly from the moonlight. It was with him that the girl spent the night. It seemed somewhat unreal. Goosebumps ran across my skin. After the stormy events after sunset, the body was pleasantly heavy and tired. On the snow-white skin there were crimson marks of hot kisses. My cheeks turned red from the memory. The girl ran her fingers through her mop of hair. She had heard a lot about the guy's difficult character, but he surpassed all words. If there were a young man to the taste of the fatal beauty, the red-haired woman would not think about the disadvantages of a man's temperament. Dawn was soon to return to their part of the globe. The girl thought hard about what else needed to be done in order to exchange bodies with her companion. Turning around, the miss hooked her toe on the brunette's body and golden sparkles covered her entire gaze. A second later, the crimson hair lay peacefully on the pillow. The guy, on the contrary, woke up. He moved his fingers. He looked around the ceiling. Everything worked out. Now Miss was in her lover's body. The girl immediately began to examine her hands and body. What was unusual were the large muscles and the huge difference in the size of the pair. The story of the crown prince was soon to be revealed to people. The young man hastily pulled on his black trousers and began to fasten the buttons on his shirt. He turned around to look at the previous body. From the outside, the girl looked cute. He spent 15 years in this body, but he never got used to the owner's face. She was the youngest daughter of Duke Chandler, Irinia. A beauty, always in traditional outfits of the Far East and with bright, long hair that smelled of sweet fruits. Before getting into her body, everything was much worse. The girl was a poor student, a real gray mouse in society. Then she moved into the body of a 6-year-old girl. Everyone considered her the first beauty in the empire. Smiling at the memories, the guy left the room. Irinia's body needed to recover from the transition, but that was no longer his problem. There were only a few reasons why he needed to move into the body of the crown prince. A long time ago, the sorceress cursed the family of Prince Derek and took him prisoner. However, later he found his love who lifted the spell. All I had to do was spend a hot night with her. Again and again. But things were never too simple. Duke Chandler's family was doomed to destruction. Derek noticed that something strange was happening in his body. The doctor helped him recover. He turned out to be the girl's younger brother, Cedric. No matter how much the prince was treated with potions, it was all useless. Naturally, this would never help a man. Curses were not cured like diseases. The distraught guy branded his entire family for treason. All members were killed, not quickly, but with pleasure while watching the suffering. The girl looked at the fire consuming her house, loved ones, favorite things and memories. In return, she remembered how the sorceress lifted the spell from Derek. It was all about the potion, which was worth drinking for 15 days. Miss could easily cook it. But naturally, the prince did not trust other people. Therefore, it was necessary to become one yourself. From the moment Dare grew up, the girl began to seduce him. Lead everything to tonight. At first, he was cold and indifferent. The girl seemed to teach him other emotions, feelings and desires. River's Island. A hurricane was raging outside. Thunder and lightning cut through the cozy evenings of the townspeople. Irinia stood at the threshold of the prince's chambers. He sent his girlfriend away from him. But from Mrs. Sly's smile, it was clear that she was plotting some kind of plan. Derek went down to the first floor. Servants, soldiers, and a butler were waiting for him there. They quickly reported that the rain had ended and the clouds were clearing across the sky. The man waited in the hall until midday when a bird appeared in the distance. It was the imperial envoy flying with a red ribbon on his paw. The burgundy bandage indicated that grief had happened in the ruler's family. One of the family members was feeling ill. She turned out to be the mother of the Reiferya Empire, Empress Elise, the woman who gave new life to the country. The prince immediately decided to return home. Everything was about the plan that Irinia thought through. Naturally, everything was fake, from the bird to the message. Morning. The man woke up from sunlight through the open attic window. My whole body hurt terribly. A second and he realized that everything seemed too wrong. Opening my eyes, I saw thin wrists and a neat manicure. These were women's hands. Turning to the mirror, the prince saw the appearance of a man who framed him by moving him into someone else's body. The rain continued to pour on the ground as if it had no intention of stopping the cataclysm. The warm light of the lamp illuminated the box. Velvet, small chest with gold monograms and a handle on the lid. The couple woke up with a buzzing head. The room was very stuffy and humid from the aromatic lamps. The guy pulled back the lid of the hiding place and threw a white pill into his mouth. Grimacing with bitterness, he swallowed saliva. He asked Irinia to hold out her palm and put the same pill into it. For some reason, he asked me to eat it for the sake of the two of them. The red-haired girl chuckled and nodded. The yellow eyes, not yet fully awake, sparkled with a cunning brilliance. There was the sound of water behind the wall. Derek went to shower. The beauty did not intend to stay in her chambers for long. I threw the pressed powder out the window to be torn apart by the rain. She called His Majesty, pretending that she had just made herself more comfortable on the bed. The man loomed over her. Drops of water flowed from skin to skin. The girl pulled the prince by the neck to her lips. In the morning, the sky looked like marshmallows in a child's package. Pink, blue, and yellow tones brightened the usual dawn. The ship rocked on the waves, raising its anchor. The weather was fine. The wind raised the sails, directing people to the right place. Derek stood up from the bench. The sound of the waves was in my ears. It was impossible to get away from it, even if I locked myself in the farthest cabin. Kisses burst into memories. Irene. Soft fabrics on the bed, red curls so long that they reached the opposite edge of the bed. He sighed contentedly. If everything went correctly, then this body will belong to him for as long as necessary for the plan. The butler came up behind him. Reported that Miss Irene was still sleeping. This was not bad because the body was recovering after the soul had moved. The brunette turned around. He asked what was bothering the servant so much. Sleep for a girl and the female body in general was very important. The servant took his leave and left to give orders to the maids to prepare the princess for going out in public. The prince always gave her gifts that other girls did not accept. But even despite this, such attention was much better than nothing. This time, the man, in the same way, passed through the maids a pink box with a crimson bow, matching the color of the girl's hair. Irinia pressed her fist against the window frame and peered out at the deck. Her body, the body of a prince, belonged to a girl, while the prince himself found himself in a female form. Her neck ached from the marks she left on this body. The gaze crossed with his own eyes. The soul of Irinia stood before him. Miss desperately pounded on the door with her fists. Cursed would be this day and the night preceding it. The maids interpreted the princess's hysteria differently. They began to support her and accused the prince of simply leaving after spending the night together. Irinia rolled her eyes. We had to look for the positives in everything. For example, now the prince did not need to send spies to find out what people were whispering about behind his back. It was in vain that he trusted the cunning girl and stayed in bed with her all night. All actions led to certain consequences. The man still needed to get used to the girl's weak body. Turn your head more carefully, take a step less sharply, and clench your thin fingers less. The man asked the servants to leave him alone and decided to think about further actions alone. Later, the maids brought tea and a gift from Derek in a burgundy box with a rose on top of it. She immediately suspected something was wrong with the girl and did not want to have unnecessary connections with her and her family. However, vigilance was quickly eclipsed by beautiful eyes. The girl threw the box away, crushing it on the floor. It was an extremely impudent gesture on the part of the prince to remind her of his bad attitude towards her. Trampling the box into the carpet, Irinia thought about how in her previous body the prince wanted to propose to the girl. It never occurred to Derek how cunning his victim might seem to be. And he himself turned out to be the weak link. The girl did not need love, feelings, gifts, and time together. All she wanted was Derek's body. Duchy of Chandler. The princess was supported by the arms of a maid. The girl reached the castle in poor health with terrible weakness in her body. Walking into the room, Derek's mind was surprised. The room was in all sorts of pink colors. An endless number of crowns, hats, books, and veils. This was Irinia's room. The girl took off her headdress, showing power in her home. She lifted her skirt and walked along the wall. She took the mirror and peered at the facial features of the new body. It would seem that everything is the same as from the outside, but it felt radically different. Thinking about this, the miss did not notice how the maid addressed her. She asked what the lady was worried about. Resentment towards the real Irene haunted the prince. It was unpleasant to realize that you were being used. The girl always smiled at him, pretending to listen to him carefully and understand. It hurts to admit that the girl didn't care about this. Derek thought that if he elevated his girlfriend to crown princess, it would benefit their families and improve the couple's relationship. However, Irinia abandoned him. It was her decision that was made. Now enmity began between them. The woman's foresight was amazing. Surely she thought through the plan long before the fateful day. Since their communication was not related to the desire to gain power, then the miss had other reasons for doing so. In the past, private homes have been attacked with particular force and hatred. Therefore, he, the prince, was given into captivity for the good of the people. The boy did not want to leave the castle, his parents, his friends. However, even then, as a small child, he understood that these were the disadvantages of the prince's life. The emperor would never have gone into captivity himself. However, he was glad to send anyone in his place, just to save his good name. It was always necessary to worship and believe the words that the emperor did not make mistakes. When the child was riding in a carriage with one chest of things and one bag of food, he realized an important thing. His parents did not value him. Alison's kingdom. In the light of the sunset, the red walls and panoramic windows, as if covered in blood, greeted the captive with hostility. There were terrible rumors about this place. Not a day passed here without murders, investigations, secrets, and abductions. And the servants who were assigned to the prince changed after every night. Not out of caution. They all died. Then Derek understood the meaning that would lead him to the title of Crown Prince. He wanted to protect his children and country in the future, without the sacrifice of a little boy. So the teenager trained day after day, became stronger and more powerful, fearless and smarter, faster and more honest. Thus, the prince awakened the ancient sword of the demonic dragon. With him, the young man gathered an army and set off to gain hundreds of victories. Having left his homeland as a prisoner, the now adult child returned as a hero of the empire. The girls here and there gasped at the presence of the prince. Everyone wanted to get at least a little attention from everyone's favorite hero. However, Derek was only interested in one girl, Irinia. The red-haired beast is ready to turn the head of the first person she meets with just one glance. While girls from all the palaces of the country tried to attract the fleeting attention of the crown prince, he admired the beautiful foreigner. Irene was nicknamed the Rose of High Society. Sophisticated, always dressed in the latest fashion, and most importantly, never accessible to others. This woman stole the commander's heart. The guy seemed to miss her forever. By amber eyes, scarlet cheeks, and plump, cherry-colored lips, the prince did not compare the lady to a rose. I always mentally called it the first mind-stirring sip of wine. On one of the days of the reception, the miss approached the future ruler and bowed at his feet, greeting him. The voice was no less charming from the princess's appearance. However, up close, the girl had cunning eyes. The princess had money, fame, love from the citizens. That's why Derek didn't understand what she wanted from him. For several months, the red-haired woman walked around the guy. She appeared as if by chance next to him. She wouldn't let me take a single step without her crimson mop of hair. One day it rained heavily. The prince was changing clothes in his chambers from thoroughly wet clothes. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Irinia stood on the threshold. She asked for forgiveness for the late visit and was frightened by something. The princess took off her hat. Clothes, hair, everything was wet from the bad weather that covered their city. The girl asked to be let inside. Allow you to warm up, dry your clothes, and wait for the end of the rain in order to return home. In order to evoke more emotions, she said that she was terribly afraid of rain and strong winds. In such weather, she could get sick or worse, be struck by lightning. Derek froze, not knowing what to answer. The heart beat faster from the transparent, damp fabric of the dress and the lady's trembling voice. Doubting that she was only trying to use the title of crown prince, the young man turned away without accepting the guest. Since then, Irene has become even more annoying. She ran after him everywhere, casually touched him or smiled in the crowd. Using stupid excuses, she clung to the brunette while he was walking in the garden or sitting near the lake. The sweet scent of peaches emanating from the princess's hair gave Derek a headache. The sound of heels along the road seemed to accompany him, like a curse from that rainy day. Turning sharply in a fit of aggression, the guy wanted to shout at the annoying girl, however. He could not utter a word. Instead of screams and words that he didn't want to look at her new dress, revelations came out. Derek touched the buds of the cream roses. He said that he always liked to spend time in the garden, enveloping himself like a blanket in the fresh smell of flowers. Irinia immediately picked up the conversation. She admitted that she had long dreamed of visiting the royal garden with the crown prince. The girl picked a not fully ripened flower and coquettishly inserted it into her hair. The white petals stood out brightly against the background of her crimson hair. The young man's cheeks turned pink. He was very embarrassed by the Duke's daughter. Her beauty eclipsed all thoughts that she was worth being aware of. After that meeting, Derek knew he would give Miss what she wanted. He would make her crown princess. I hoped that the beauty could be trusted. Now, being in her body, knowing that an exchange of bodies had taken place between them, the man was indignant. Irene asked the maid to send a message to the prince. The maid hurried to get the paper, seeing the mistress's obvious indignation. The girls circled around the red-haired girl. Their princess turned pale, clenched her fists, and looked like she was about to faint. The maids reached out to take Mrs. body temperature. She angrily pulled her hand away. She kicked everyone out, asking them to deliver the letter and not touch her for the rest of the day. The body ached. Sweat dripped down my forehead. The girls being in Derek's body felt the changes in the soulmate state. The fact that the limit on the use of the body was also set further angered the commander's soul. However, there was no more strength left. Morning. The sun's rays fell smoothly onto the castle like petals, raising the residents to their feet before a new day. The commander was sitting at the table talking with the butler. As it turned out, the news about his mother's illness was a lie in order to distract the young man. Someone faked the message very well. Burgundy ribbon, bird from the royal aviary. Everything was thought out. Irenia's soul breathed a sigh of relief. No one had yet guessed that it was a girl and her servant. The plan wasn't really that complicated. It was necessary to choose the perfect day and then act quickly and quietly. First of all, the girl made her way into the castle, and then sending the message took less than 10 minutes. As imperceptibly as she appeared, the mist disappeared. Considering how long Irene had been watching the prince, she knew his every move. There was nothing to indicate that Derek had been replaced. There was another important plus. Irenia's brother Ain worked in the castle. He was her main accomplice and cover. However, now in a new body, the brother could trip her up in the plan. But in vast domains, it is unlikely that they would have met so quickly. More troubles went into preparing such trifles and everyday details of the prince's life. Despite his high position, the man had a lot of work with documents, various writings, and meetings. Irenia followed these processes, learning his style of presentation, handwriting, and manner of behavior almost by heart. Naturally, all this could not have happened without the help of Ain. However, her memory and ingenuity were still there. A banquet was to take place in a few days in honor of Derek's birthday. It was worth preparing for this even more than for work. The Marquis of Charleville stood at the prince's desk while he thought about something. Looking over the letter, the man chewed his mustache. He asked if he could ask a question that might offend the prince somewhat. It was necessary to behave in the style of the crown prince, so Irene nodded. The old man started a conversation from afar, saying that he had been next to him day after day for many years, and it seemed to him that the gentleman had little rest and looked very tired. He should have rested and left the work on the servant's shoulders. The young man only nodded happily at this. He got up from the table and asked the Marquis to find him a book for the evening. Its name was complicated. I had to write it down. The Imperial Comedy and Tragedy of Sir Diana was the title of the work. There was no this book in the royal castle, because the author was Irenia herself. However, the servant was ready to travel around the world in search of this book. In a bookstore, the book would be immediately wrapped in paper. The Marquis would have brought the package without knowing what was actually inside. The guy leaned back in his chair. Everything went according to plan. Just 15 days left and the curse would be lifted. There was chaos in Irene's house. The maids ran around the emaciated mistress. They held her hands while things fell off her bony body. So the maids noticed red marks on the girl's body. They were afraid of Derek's cruelty, even in such a seemingly pleasant activity. The prince's soul continued to be surprised at how fragile the body of the first beauty of the empire was. In a fit of passion, the couple could squeeze each other, scratch and pull each other's skin. However, such bright marks were a sign of the most delicate skin. The princess's body looked in the mirror, and Derek's inner world was reflected on the other side. It was hard to get used to this routine. The maids continued to scold the crown prince for his excessive cruelty and lack of manners. The girl's head fell into her hands. It was unbearable to listen all day long about my terrible character and misleading nature. Sooner or later she will have to meet the two brothers. They will immediately understand that this is not their favorite Rose, but a fake in the guise of a sister. Having sent the maids out the door, the princess wanted to be left alone with her thoughts, guesses, and plans. In the green garden, the red-haired girl sat on a stump reading a book. The pages rustled from time to time like their source, the trees. The memory of their meeting while reading books cut through the prince's thoughts. How could such a smart girl act so recklessly? It was impossible to understand the motive behind the real Irinia's actions. In order to stop the girl, it was necessary to start by getting her body back. But how could this happen? A question that has worried the young man for 2 days. Then he didn't eat anything special and didn't drink suspicious drinks. The only thing different about that fateful day was the night spent with the princess. She, as it turned out, was a true sorceress. If everything was so simple, then it was necessary to repeat the night again. Force a girl in her own body to lie in the same bed. The full moon rose over the castle. Lanterns with warm yellow light were lit on the verandas. Several days have already passed since the girl's soul was transferred into the body of Prince Frederick Reiferger. Thanks to careful preparation, no one noticed any changes in the air. During this time, the guy even managed to spend the evening in the company of the king and queen. However, dinner went even better than expected. It was impossible not to take into account the fact that we rulers were ashamed in front of their son. The boy, at an early age, had to survive captivity and get out of there as a hero. The man's body seemed to reject emotions and pain. Derek was so used to suppressing feelings that this quality remained in the very shell of the young man. The last time the crown prince cried was on the very day when the carriage was taking him to the ill-fated castle. The girl pulled herself back every time. You couldn't get attached to the guy's story. All she needed was to lift the curse. The Marquise entered the dining room. The man brought tea and some news. Duke Chandler's men arrived at the castle, apparently sent by Lady Irinia herself. The prince shook his head. This visit was not urgent. The servant could send the envoys back. The old man left the room. Only Frederick and a pot of aromatic tea remained in silence. The young man sank into a chair. The prince's soul was extremely intelligent and quick-witted. Surely the true crown prince had already guessed who exactly took his body. During these 15 days, any touch to Irene's body could bring everything back. The couple was not allowed to intersect. The young man took the book out of the package. Inside was an envelope with an important recipe for the very potion the witch was talking about. Small envelopes with antidote powder were hidden in a kind of hiding place, exactly in the middle of the publication. Small grains of an illegal, hard-to-find substance were dipped into the tea. The broth had to brew for 2 hours. Sip, second. The cup is empty. The potion was bitter and smelled of something particularly unpleasant and sour. The man tiredly slammed the book and envelope shut. It was worth waiting just 2 weeks, and the test was finally going to end. There was one more problem. The prince received dozens of letters every day from women who wanted to become crown princesses. The prince's heart was occupied by the red-haired beast, and no other lady received a chance from the #1 bachelor in the empire. Later, when the couple returned to their bodies with the curse lifted, Irene could lie about not knowing such details about her illness. I would make myself a victim in their fight. It was not necessary to become queen. The main thing was to avoid family conflict. Long ago, the Grand Duke placed a curse on Derek. After many unsuccessful attempts to kill the crown prince, Irinia's goal was to free the guy from the spell and give the heir a quiet life without suffering. Miss didn't really want to become a wife, so she didn't pursue this goal during communication, and during further communication with Derek. The lady wanted to start a family with a person who would love and support her. The king's son had a bad character. There was a knock on the door. The guest identified himself as Pierre Sylvain. The girl's soul just thought about him. I decided to enter. The ash-blonde bowed. Numerous medals and awards for victory in the war shone on his chest. However, thanks to her good memory, the girl noticed some differences in the face, gestures, and the soldier himself. With her, the young man was always smiling and good-natured. Under the king's son, he was serious and unshakable. Derek pretended to be very busy with papers on his desk. He asked why exactly the commander came. The blonde told about the video of Chandler's family. Apparently, the guy had interesting news about Irinia. The crown prince stated that he had already sent the duke's envoys back. The soldier sighed and suggested that the future king was too willful towards Lady Chandler. The prince crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. The family of the duke and Count Sylvan were indeed close and very similar in their views. Pierre was a good friend of Irene's brothers. The fathers had been friends since childhood. It was not for nothing that the soldier stood up for his friend. Unfortunately, Lady Chandler herself had personal squabbles with the earl. Despite the good relations between the families, Irinia did not want to get close to Lilia Sylvan, Pierre's younger sister. Because of the plan in which she had to spend the night with Derek, The girls were not supposed to be friends. She, by right, was destined to fall in love with the crown prince. The lady's hostility was based on two different tastes and visions of life. Different style, makeup, and manner of communicating with others. It was wrong to behave so harshly towards Miss, but Irene's own life depended on it. The guys stood opposite each other. Pierre openly opposed the prince, defending her. This was important. Looking into each other's eyes, the heir snorted and returned to the papers. It was his business, and the guy also wanted to decide how and to whom he treated on his own. In addition, Cedric and Ahin Chandler, Irinia's brothers, asked to convey a request to the soldier. Young people defended their sister, organized a boycott, and always demanded leave if their sister's health deteriorated. The prince crossed his fingers and rested his chin on them. He sighed and asked to transfer permission for a weekend of several days. Already leaving the office, the soldier asked if Derek was going to invite Lady Chandler to the Queen's ball. The answer was negative. The girl celebrated the day in the garden with her brother. He brought her tea and cakes. Another found his sister's favorite bear from her childhood. The prince's soul was indignant about this. The young man considered the love between them stupid and similar to clownism. It was difficult for a boy who grew up in captivity and in an endless war to understand such strong family ties. Irene's favorite bear was made by hand, and one of the brothers stuffed it with cotton wool himself. It would seem nice, but not for Frederick. Young people repeated many times a day that their sister's illness was associated with stress and accumulated emotions. The boys hugged her and left the bedroom. The argument about where, who, and what exactly said wrong echoed down the corridor for a long time. My head seemed to boil from such an oversaturation of family attention. Finally, silence and nothing else hung in the room. There were 15 unbearable days left before the exchange. During this time, task number 1 was not to go crazy. Resentment towards Irene ate from the inside. Having stolen the prince's first night, the lady did not hesitate to defiantly return the necklace given to her the day before. The only option to find information about the curse and its destruction was to go to the library. As soon as Derek understood the meaning of such an insidious act, he would immediately reveal Irinia's secret to the whole world. Showed her real face. The prince was surprised at what else the girl was capable of for the sake of her, most likely selfish goal. Having lost hope of finding any clue, it was as if a button was pressed under the girl's knee. A cache came out from the first bookcase on the left. The safe was a hollow pull-out shelf above the drawers. The guy's soul rejoiced. Apparently he found Irinia's secret. This only meant that victory was one step away. The book looked like a book, in a regular cover with regular pages. But Mrs. Simple's favorite book could not be in the hiding place. The girl opened the book and began flipping through the pages one after another, not missing a single seam, folded corner, or glued sheets. Deciding to read the text, the prince's consciousness was horrified. My hands were covered with goosebumps and my eyes ran over the shelves. The book turned out to be not at all what it seemed at first glance. In fact, it was an ordinary photo album, but with especially expressive photos of the actors. Irene's body landed painfully on the mattress, thereby lifting yet another plush toy in the room. The cunning girl even changed the hiding place. Frederick wanted to quickly return to his body and live as before. For now, his whole body ached with pain and fatigue. His heart was tormented by the fact that he would never again be able to look at the princess's charming smile as before. It's morning. Dawn painted the sky with pink and gold tones, driving the moon into shadow. The prince jumped up after his sleep. My chest heaved with deep sighs. Around was his bedroom, bed in view from the window. Feeling his body, the guy realized that he had returned to his body. Not believing my feelings, I grabbed the mirror and peered into my own face. Irenia woke up stretching out on soft pillows. The birds were already sitting on the windowsill and singing morning melodies with all their might. The red-haired girl looked around her fingers, her legs, and the room. Finally, she managed to return her native body. Surprisingly, the prince did not leave wounds on her body so that upon her return, the miss would suffer from pain. The maid quietly entered the room. She asked if the lady had woken up and what she had wanted since the morning. The girl asked to prepare a simple breakfast. Eva was glad that Her Majesty had returned to her former tastes. Irene smiled. Finally, she asked me to tell the family to gather in the garden in the afternoon for a cup of tea. Mrs. Brothers and father were already sitting at the table. They did not touch the tea and cakes, heatedly discussing their relative's illness. The girl quietly came out from behind the peony bush. She apologized to her family and took her place at the table. Dad immediately began pouring a drink into his daughter's cup, reverently calling her baby. Irenia laughed. asking how long her parents would call her little despite her 21 years of age. The family plunged into memories from the girl's childhood. She smiled and started eating. I remembered the days when she lived with her brothers. The redheads often joked that if someone suddenly fell in love with their sister, they would have to hit her harder and run away just as quickly. The pleasant atmosphere was interrupted by the envoy. He ran holding his black coat and tried to catch his breath. His Highness the Crown Prince wanted to see Lady Chandler in his castle as soon as possible. Silence hung over the table. My father was immediately against this. His princess was too weak to move around the castle, let alone the neighboring kingdoms. The daughter placed her hand on top of the duke's clenched fist. It was not difficult for her to visit the future ruler, especially if it sounded like an order and not a proposal. As she left, the miss thanked the family for the pleasant time and hurried to fetch the messenger. The carriage arrived at the prince's castle toward sunset. Irene was waiting for this moment with special trepidation. On her way out, the princess saw the crown prince himself. The rising sun of the empire itself greeted the guest at the threshold. The girl stood in front of the tall and strong commander. It was time for the culmination of her plan. The couple walked silently along the path. Derek walked ahead thinking about something and rubbing his chin. A flirtatious girl trotted behind him. The hat hung playfully to one side and the heels clicked loudly on the paving stones. The man stopped and looked around. There was no one nearby. No one could overhear their conversation. The young man asked the question directly. He was interested in what exactly the princess did with their bodies and what it was for. The brunette noted that before this event the beauty always smiled at him and was kind. The red-haired woman bowed her head. She apologized for not understanding what His Majesty was talking about. The guy growled in anger. It was a blatant lie. The girl couldn't help but notice what had been happening over the past 2 weeks. Irenia quietly rolled her eyes. Apparently the prince thought about the incident for a long time and guessed a lot. The lady sighed. Still, she admitted that she knew about their exchange of bodies the day before. But she shook her head and said that for her it was a surprise. A surprise and quite frightened the miss. The guy's blue eyes sparkled with anger. Previously, an honest and valiant girl tried to deceive him. He buried his fingers in his hair. Any person who knew nothing about the ritual would immediately want to meet and talk. But Irene didn't do that. Milady explained her quick departure from the island by saying that a royal bird with a red ribbon had flown to her. There was no need to explain what it meant. The crown prince did not calm down. He gave the following argument. The girl rejected all the messengers he sent every day. The man blushed with anger. It was even interesting what other lies the princess would tell him. The lady admitted that she rejected all the messengers due to the fact that she really avoided His Majesty. Gathering her strength, she put her hand on her heart. She admitted that she no longer loved Prince Frederick Reiferger. It was as if an electric shock had struck the young man's body. The lower jaw dropped, the eyes widened. He was at a loss for words. His thoughts were swirling and at the same time absent. He quickly removed his bangs. Sweat streamed down my forehead. The princess did not expect such a reaction from the callous Derek. Anger at the future king was stronger than regret. Miss continued to talk about how she began to dislike the brunette and their common pastime. The guy swallowed his saliva. He paused. He asked if all the girl's words were true. Hiding her rosy cheeks behind her fan, the princess nodded. She needed the young man to believe. After looking at Frederick's empty gaze for another minute, the woman turned around and walked towards the exit from the garden. The crown prince grabbed her hand, preventing her from leaving. He asked why the red-haired girl followed him everywhere and made him fall in love with her. In fact, she told the truth. Then the hope glimmered in the girl's heart that His Highness would become kinder to her. This did not happen. Miss is tired of being rejected and receiving gifts that are not accepted by others. Derek's head was too quiet and empty. The pupils shrank and the heart seemed to stop beating altogether. Ava was waiting for the lady around the corner. The girls walked around discussing what had happened. The maid admitted that it was very strong and courageous to refuse the crown prince himself. There was only her life ahead. It was necessary to thank all the assistants and prepare for the emperor's birthday. On the way, my lady met Pierre. The soldier was just entering the garden when the girls were already heading to the carriage. The blonde, seeing Irene, bowed and blushed, still embarrassed by the incredible beauty of the princess. The red-haired woman approached her friend. He was embarrassed and could not utter even a banal sentence about the weather. Frederick ran through the maze of rose bushes. He couldn't leave the girl and give up everything that was between them. He needed to give Irenia the box, the same one he wanted to give for their wedding. Around the corner he saw her. However, in the company, Miss stood next to the maid, and Pierre smiled and blushed while talking to the Duke's daughter. Before he could get closer, he heard the soldier invite the red-haired woman to a ball in honor of the emperor. The brunette froze in front of the couple. My heart was beating fast, either from running or from emotions. Judging by the expression on Irene's face, she was not at all opposed to keeping Safier company. Such a sharp change in mood and sympathy from the chosen one plunged the knife even deeper. The pain inside became unbearable. The blonde was embarrassed. Surely the princess has already received many offers to go to the ball together. However, perhaps the commander still had a chance. Irenia's eyes shone. Pierre Sylvain was ideally suited to the role of partner at the emperor's banquet. The guy was a childhood friend, a member of the imperial party, and was the owner of a beautiful smile. Irene didn't want anything more. Miss nodded. She was silent for a minute and asked when the commander should have given an answer about what the girl decided about the invitation. The young man seemed to glow. He had a chance, and this gave him hope for a future with the beauty. He replied that the lady could notify him at any time convenient for her. The blonde offered to escort Milady to the carriage for her safety. The girls followed the soldier. The prince came around the corner. He looked angrily at the trio. He mockingly noted how the knight seemed to be enjoying his free time. The couple bowed. Irene wondered how long ago His Majesty had been watching them and what exactly he had heard. The soldier quickly apologized to the crown prince, bowed to the princess, saying that he expected a positive answer from her. Through clenched teeth, Derek asked Lady Chandler to give him a few minutes of time before leaving for his parents' house. The red-haired girl did not want to stay close to the king's heir any longer. He could continue to look for information about the exchange. In order to arouse pity, the girl began to cry. Noticing this, the brunette sighed and turned his back to the miss. He didn't need to fall for her pretense. The girls stood for a minute and walked away towards the carriage. Frederick remained standing until the princess and the maid were no longer visible. In the carriage, Irenia sat with her head down. Eve hugged her mistress by the shoulders and asked how she could help my lady. One could only hope that Derek would not tell the world who forcibly took his body and returned it just as easily. Despite the fact that the prince had no evidence, the king's heir could be believed from one word. Unlike the duke's daughter, Eva said that recently Irenia often looked at herself in the mirror. Apparently the man liked her appearance so much. If Frederick really was in love with her, the girl would not have to worry about her family. However, the crown prince was not the kind of person who would sacrifice his country for a woman. In order to distract herself, Irene asked the maid to go to the jeweler. The lady needed a new piece of jewelry. It was important to note that a specific jeweler was needed for the important business of Princess Irenia. Night has come. Derek sat at the table and thought about the girl, her hiding place, and the secrets that the appeal hid. Irenia's tears were probably fake. The guy earned this ability to distinguish true emotions thanks to his position in the country. The young man rubbed the bridge of his nose with his fingers. If he knew about the false tears, then why couldn't he ask the lady a question? Today's meeting only convinced Frederick that the body exchange was her fault. He took the jewelry out of his pocket. Pink box with a bow and small roses. Inside was a necklace for a marriage proposal to the duke's daughter. The door behind me opened. The Marquis stuck his head through the crack and asked permission to enter for a short conversation with His Majesty. The prince nodded. The old man walked up to the table and took out a package of tea from his bag. He spoke with exaggerated delight about the excellent taste and healthfulness of the drink. I didn't forget to mention that for the last 2 weeks everyone has been busy searching for this variety. Derek wasn't surprised by this. He slammed his fist on the table and asked to call young Mr. Chandler. The heir needed an urgent medical examination. The blood ampoule was full. The nurse took a test to check the body for abnormalities. Frederick needed to know from the examination findings what the body had been eating lately. The man did not hide the fact that he suspected Irene of taking poisonous herbs or drinks in order to harm the crown prince. I thought about how correctly it was worth punishing Miss. I imagined how the girl had to suffer after she left the boy after the night together. Eve burst into the room. In their hands were boxes with new jewelry masterpieces. Silver ring with diamonds and a necklace to go with it. The maid was delighted with the appearance of her mistress. The lady always received her outfits in a single copy from the designers she had worked with since childhood. Thanks to her particularly ideal appearance, world designers signed contracts with the Chandler family. Speaking of the outfit, the maid took out a box with letters from guys who wanted to go to the ball with the Rose of the Empire. Without opening the envelopes, Irenia began to write a letter. Eva looked over her mistress's shoulder with curiosity. Having put the stamp, Miss asked to send the answer to Count Sylvain. The eyes sparkled slyly in anticipation of meeting the soldier. As she was leaving, the girl reminded the princess of her upcoming meeting with Madame. Irene was ready to come down any minute. The family gathered around the table, already set for dinner. The father was pleased with his daughter's good mood. There were no brothers at the table. Mother reported that one of the brothers was summoned to the crown prince's palace. This news greatly surprised Irene. I asked if the empress's condition had worsened since the brother himself was called. The duke reassured his daughter that everything was fine with Derek's mother. It was the prince himself who demanded to undergo a full medical examination. The man turned out to be extremely smart. There was a certain percentage of poison in the tea that she took into His Majesty's body. This posed a great danger to the princess. If it turns out that the lady tried to poison the heir, she was threatened with execution. Fortunately, on the last day of her stay in the young man's body, Irene drank a drink that neutralized all toxins and made them invisible for analysis. My brother appeared behind me, hugged the girl. As always, there was a special connection and understanding between them. Crown Prince's castle. The sun was at its zenith. Life was in full swing on the palace grounds. The nurse brought the test results straight to Frederick Reiferger's chambers. There were no serious deviations in the table. No possible attempted murder was observed in the body. The prince asked if the poison could have been taken over a long period of time. The doctor rustled his papers in fear. He said that if Derek did not take the neutralizer, then the analysis would show even the smallest dose of poison in the body. The heir asked the guy to take this more seriously and check everything that His Majesty had taken over the past 2 weeks. The notebook seemed to rustle with pages covered in all the information about the Crown Prince's health. The only herb that was seen in the tea carried beneficial enzymes for men's health. Nothing more. This fact greatly surprised the young man. He himself would not have thought of taking a drug of such effect. The nurse tried to hold back a laugh. He explained that the decoction did not cause any harm except benefit for greater stamina. The prince was horrified. The girl not only hid what exactly she was trying to send to His Majesty, but also disgraced him in front of those close to him. All the next time, Frederick thought about whether this was the reason that Irene left him. Cedric, still in his chambers, tried so hard to hold back his laughter that he blushed. The enraged prince asked if the doctor was going to mock him. The guy quickly pulled himself together. Irene openly laughed at her former lover and was not afraid of the consequences. In addition, it is unlikely that the girl who was initially ready to leave him would try to improve the young man's health. From this, Derek came to the logical conclusion that the fatal maiden tricked the future king himself like a child. It wasn't his behavior or the night they spent together. Irenia's plan has been going on since the beginning of their communication. The naive young prince thought that if a couple spent the night together, then the only outcome was marriage. Unfortunately, he was wrong. The angry brunette took the notebook from the nurse and tore all the sheets of paper in it. Irene was sitting on a bench in the garden. Nearby stood a teapot with aromatic tea and a book. Birds sang around and the atmosphere was truly magical. My brother's voice came from behind. Cedric was already hurrying to his beloved little sister. Judging by his mood, the young man was about to tell a funny story from his work. Usually there were quite a lot of these and the guys joked about it for a long time. In their ear, as if someone could hear them, the brother told the crown prince's secret about herbs. His laughter brought tears to his eyes. However, Irene was not amused by this story. This behavior alarmed the elder. Before, the girl was always happy to share rumors with him. The girl was very ashamed. Having spent so much time reading about how good the neutralizer was, Miss forgot to look at the other properties of the herbs. She wanted to lift the prince's curse, but not to disgrace him in her own circle. Covering her face with her gloved hands, Irene lowered her head. She was overcome with a bad feeling. Misunderstanding Milady's sudden change in mood, Cedric grabbed his sister by the shoulders and began to shake her. He asked to forget the heartless ruler and not suffer. The red-haired girl twisted out of the tenacious and loving arms. His cheeks turned red, either from embarrassment or from his brother's violent reaction. Walking in the garden, the girl thought about how her father and brothers took care of her. Still, such care could not but please the fragile princess. Ahead there was a small tunnel of bush climbing roses. This was the path along which Irenia took her first steps. The father could not leave this place just like that and decorated it in the best traditions of a loving family. Lost in pleasant thoughts, the lady almost missed the prince's voice around the corner. He was outraged by something. Irene did not understand what His Majesty was doing in their castle. She hid between the bushes in the shade. Hearing the timid apologies of her guards who could not find her, she decided to approach his sunshine herself. She asked the guards to leave the couple alone and sighed and turned to face Frederick Reiferger. She bowed to the crown prince and offered to escort him inside the castle and receive the heir properly. The brunette didn't move. He asked if the princess wanted to forget everything about their night and pretend that nothing had happened between them. Fortunately, at least in her thoughts, Irene was honest with herself. She liked Derek even despite his shyness. Sighing, the red-haired girl turned to the guy. I asked why he thought that this was the reason for their separation. She admitted that her brother told her everything. The tea that Miss drank was good for the immune system, and she didn't even suspect that it contained an aphrodisiac. Frederick sighed. Even though the princess did not want to disgrace him, the fact that she fed his body with poison was provable. The only salvation for Irene's head was the prince's confession of his curse. However, this could then affect his future throne. Such a bold statement from the heir angered the miss, and she snorted irritably. Using the same way of thinking, one could guess that His Majesty was hiding a knife under his jacket. However, the young man only pulled out a pink box from his inner pocket. Irenia managed to duck from a possible blow. Without feeling any pain, she looked up and saw in front of her a gold chain with a charming pendant in the form of a royal symbol. The crown prince blushed. He offered a deal. He forgets about Lady Chandler's trick and she was supposed to become his wife. Silence. Milady's amber eyes glared at the velvet covering of the box. The couple seemed not to be breathing. A moment later, Miss took her eyes off the young man's hands and turned away. She replied that she could not accept His Majesty's offer. She shook her head and explained that she wanted to marry for love, and that's the only way. Even the opportunity to become queen could not convince the principled lady. The prince slammed the box shut. The reason was indeed ridiculous and wrong. He took the girl by the hand and lowered himself to her ear. Almost in a whisper, he said that if she was not satisfied with their night, they could repeat it again. Irene blushed and tucked a curl of hair behind her right ear. The brunette's words radiated heat throughout his entire body. Frederick's ideal face, strong body, and ideal position in society did not fit in with his stupid words. The red-haired girl jerked her shoulder sharply and walked away from the man. She said that the cat's offer was impossible to fulfill. As Irenia had said earlier, she no longer loved Prince Derek and wanted nothing to do with him. The prince sighed and closed his eyes. It was hard to be next to a girl who not only broke his heart, but also created a huge problem with the reincarnation of their souls. In her own thoughts, Irene thought about how things would have turned out for them if Frederick had not stood in her way. Derek gave the princess one last chance. She only needed to answer the question of what was the reason for Lady Chandler's actions. The red-haired girl began to flirt in front of the brunette. It was necessary to get out of their dialogue as easily and quickly as possible. She knew how His Majesty was affected when the princess called the young man by name. He immediately blushed and could not contradict Milady. Blue eyes burned with rage. The future king raised his voice, wanting to know why the duke's daughter did this to their bodies. Irenia thought that no one in her place would refuse to become the wife or mistress of the crown prince. However, their paths had to diverge. The girl picked up the box, closed it, and twirled it in her hands. Without looking up, she apologized to the brunette. She placed the box in the palm of the future king. She explained that love in one direction would not lead their couple to anything good. Because she needed to say goodbye to Derek. Pain pierced my body. It came from the inside, exactly from where the prince was now holding his hand. Irene's words pierced his chest like arrows. The look became empty. The girl continued to talk about the values of the Chandler family. That she needed a young and caring partner. Frederick clenched his fists. Without containing the anger in his voice, he asked what kind of love the Rose of the Empire craved. Irene did not try to explain to a person who could not feel anything what kind of love she needed. Footsteps and a man's voice were heard from behind. The girl slowly turned around, trying to calm down after a verbal altercation with His Majesty. It turned out to be only the jeweler Hades Killian. Behind him rattled a box of precious stones for the lady. Irenia breathed a sigh of relief. She asked the guy to go to the castle, and my mother hurried to say goodbye to the prince. As he passed, the guest examined His Majesty from head to toe. Frederick asked with undisguised contempt who the young man was. Irenia introduced her personal jeweler. In a whisper, the brunette asked if the professional was too young. The girl laughed. She was not going to be with every second person in the empire, and the young man seemed like a child because of his thin physique. She asked again if the crown prince could leave them alone to work. It was necessary to carefully drive away the annoying blue-eyed one. Sitting in the hall, Irene stroked the boy's hair and thanked him for coming today just on time. The blonde blushed. He was pleased with the lady's words and faithfully accepted the praise. The princess smelled the perfume in Hylian's hair. She asked why he did this. The boy rested his chin on the sofa. He asked what didn't suit Irinia and why she was angry with him. Miss hastened to assure that there was no problem, that the guy was getting older. However, she noticed that he should have applied less perfume before coming to her. A rumor could have arisen in the castle that in this way, the teenager seduced the already adult daughter of the duke. The blonde irritably buried his forehead in the leather upholstery of the sofa. He hissed through his teeth as he rose to his feet, angrily asked if Irene knew that he had become an adult. This news shocked the princess. She quickly counted all the jeweler's birthdays on her fingers and was convinced that she had completely forgotten about the recent holiday in honor of his 18th birthday. The guy was indignant because the red-haired girl did not pay attention to him at all, especially considering the fact that Miss was the only person who supported him. Rolling her eyes, Irinia blamed everything on the huge number of things to do, plans and fatigue. Hades shrugged at this. Looking at the face of her old friend, the girl plunged into memories. The children met 10 years ago. A funeral was taking place. The little boy was sent to Irene, the daughter of the duke. They promised him that the girl would become a friend and support for him. The blonde said this extremely skeptically, because in front of him stood an elegant little princess. He himself was a ragamuffin from a simple family. Even then, the girl knew how to roll her eyes and wag her index finger. Strictly, like a mother, she asked Hades to behave respectfully towards people 2 years older than him. At that time, as a teenager, it was difficult for her to support and treat people with understanding. For this purpose, I had to create a separate personality. Blonde, abandoned by his father and became a thief. He needed to be put on the right path and become a support for the child. All night after that, Irinia sat under the blanket with her favorite bear, a flashlight and a book. She read and thought about how it would be better for her to help her new friend. Thanks to the influence and support of the ducal family, the guy quickly increased his strength and ruled underground in the imperial capital. Trying to make amends, the princess asked what she could give for her assistant's birthday. Chuckling and not looking up from the decorations, the young man asked to save his wish until 20 in order to steal Irene's kiss. The girl rolled her eyes and sighed. At times, young guys were unbearable to communicate with. Hades touched on the topic of what he had learned about life in the main palace. The young man saw the strange movement of the noble faction. This small event could lead to big consequences. Irene was inclined to believe that people were preparing en masse for the election of the crown princess. At the emperor's ball, Frederick would certainly have raised this topic. Due to the fact that next to His Majesty there was always the Rose of the Empire, the faction was still unable to nominate its candidate. Now the road was open. The red-haired girl asked Hades to listen to every rumor circulating about her and report them to the mistress. The boy, without hesitation, suggested killing everyone who said a bad word about the princess. She shook her head wearily. It was impossible to kill indiscriminately, especially since people in this case would further strengthen Lady Chandler's bad reputation. In front of the sofa where Miss was sitting, all kinds of bracelets, pendants, earrings, rings, necklaces, and even tiaras were laid out. The young man was still trying to say something against Irinia's position. Offer to punish people who want to ruin the glory of his mistress. The girl just smiled. Even without outside help, she never left her offenders unpunished. A little later, the couple drank aromatic tea while discussing the latest news in the empire. As it turned out, Duke Cadion often exchanged letters with someone abroad. It looked suspicious. The man was the half-brother of the current emperor, and could be planning something terrible in order to ascend to the throne in Derek's place. His mother Lola was the mistress of the former ruler. Everyone treated the woman with disdain because of her low position in society. However, the lady did not intend to compete with the empress and never asked for money. Miss always kept her head down and knew her place in the castle. Despite this, she gave birth to and raised the Grand Duke. Little Cadion did not understand the behavior of his mother and his mistress. That is why he believed that his family was humiliated. A few years later, a real war broke out between the kingdoms. The fire captured the cities. The people furiously trampled the flags of the enemies and actively followed the rulers. At that time, Cad lost several brothers at once like him, heirs to the throne. In one morning, the boy took second place in line to the throne, having spent his entire life in last place. Rage bubbled up in his soul. When Derek was taken prisoner, the man no longer worried about his opportunity to step into the shoes of the emperor and take revenge on those who had wronged his family. At that time, a curse was placed on the prince, which, if revealed, would not have allowed Frederick Reiferge to become ruler. Taking small sips of tea, the princess kept thinking about who Kadion could be corresponding with so actively, and why he needed it. There was a day left before the banquet in honor of the emperor. The weather was pleasant: sun, small clouds, and light wind. The crown prince did not enjoy nature like many others, did not walk in the gardens, and did not spend time reading entertaining literature. Today the man was busy with documents, letters, and most importantly, his thoughts, from which the rose of the empire did not emerge. Surprisingly, all the pages filled out by Irene were intelligible and quite in his style of answer. Tiredly leaning against the back of the chair, I realized that the princess was not only smart, but also extremely talented at playing the role of another person. After knocking, Pierre Saffiero entered the office, just in time to distract the prince from the annoying red-haired beast. Sylvain always addressed the girl by her first name. They seemed to have known each other for a long time, and the family also got along well. Having reported the news from the service of the Seventh Order, the young man was ready to take his leave and return to his business. Not long enduring the company of the annoying soldier, His Majesty quickly released the blonde and allowed him to go to rest earlier. Without hiding his joy, the knight thanked the ruler for his generosity. Thanks to the free evening, he could better prepare for the banquet. When the young man was already leaving, the crown prince called out to him. He asked if Pierre had found a partner. He nodded his head positively and smiled proudly. He had the best couple in the entire kingdom. She was Irinia Chandler. Frederick clenched his fists. The best method of revenge was to initially hide emotions and control oneself and one's actions. No matter how much the future king tried to hide his anger at the couple, it was even beyond the self-control he had developed over the years. Before they had time to part with the girl, she was already happily allowing herself to be taken to the ball by someone else. It was outrageous. Rising from the table, the brunette stopped the leaving soldier. He asked how long the young people had been close. Frowning, the knight replied that due to good friendship from families, the couple met in childhood. Since then, they have always been together. The crown prince asked the next question. I was wondering who first suggested that the two of them go to the banquet. The blonde replied that he had previously asked about His Highness's plans for the lady. Having received a negative answer, he immediately went to ask for the princess's attention. Derek squeezed his own forearm. When the woman was in his body, she did everything in advance to avoid his company. Blue eyes peered into the soldier's pale skin. Of course, the young man was the center of attention of the lady. During the parade, all the ladies who wanted attention ran up to the commander of the 7th Detachment and offered scarves, water, food, and even themselves as support after the battle. The knight himself never refused attention, but only encouraged the girls to crawl in front of him with his pleasant words. The prince considered Pierre and that guy from the jewelry store as far from equal to him. The guys were pale and quite thin. Derek happily imagined young Sylvain crying in his bedroom after Irene left him. To this day, a certain wound in the prince's chest ached disgustingly, reminding him of his hopes and joint plans with the Rose of the Empire. The future king decided to change the topic. Reminded that they had a common enemy, Duke Kadion. He planned to seize the throne at any cost, especially after Derek managed to escape from captivity. If necessary, in order to save her family, Lady Chandler would have to choose a husband who would give protection to her and her family. The blonde lowered his head and nodded. He understood exactly what the ruler was hinting at. After the knight left, the brunette tiredly rubbed his temples. He was surprised by how often Irene appeared in his thoughts. The day of the banquet has arrived. Eva circled around the mistress and squealed with delight at the sight of the princess's outfit. The redhead wore an off-the-shoulder burgundy dress, jewelry to match the outfit, curls and lace gloves. Before leaving, the maid threw a cloak on the lady in the same shade as the dress. She happily sent Miss to the ball, satisfied with her work. Father and brother were already standing at the carriage. The men admired the appearance of their girl and smiled from ear to ear. The brother promised that all the guys who saw the lady would faint from her beauty and radiance. A security guard approached them, notified about the arrival of the eldest son of the Count Sylvian family, Pierre. Irinia's eyes shone. The commander looked great in his dress uniform, blue with white edging and pearl buttons. The blonde was just as confused. His companion was gorgeous in her new look, and the color of the dress emphasized her aristocratic pale skin. The couple set off in a separate carriage. The moon, stars, and the incredible beauty of the Milky Way have already disappeared in the sky. The soldier shook hands with his companion. Irene entered a charming carriage with warm lights and soft benches. Pierre sincerely confessed to Miss that he was hoping for a wonderful evening in her company. This made the redhead smile. Sitting opposite the blonde, the girl noted her companion's trembling palm and shifting gaze. She openly asked if the man was nervous. Closing the door, the young man nodded. He admitted that anyone who bothered to dance with the very rose of the empire was worried. In addition, the knight was responsible for the safety of the princess. The girl smiled. It was nice to stay close to a responsible and skilled warrior. The blonde was still embarrassed. I asked the young lady to voice any suspicions or ask her to leave if she became uncomfortable. He suggested discussing in advance who exactly should be kept at a distance from the princess. Pierre smiled as if he had not said anything strange. Irenia caught a hint of Prince Derek in his words. Main castle. The musicians had already played a classical symphony for string orchestra. The ladies from the balconies turned to the entrance and began to whisper. All eyes turned to the newly arrived guests. Lady Chandler entered, accompanied by Commander Sylvian. Everyone was amazed at the ladies' choice this year, and the princess's outfit made the ladies jealously pull back their skirts. Passing by the ladies from the aristocratic faction, they changed their gaze, covering their smiles twisted with anger with fans. Such a sharp flow of negative emotions surprised Irenia. She didn't expect so many girls on the enemy team. One of the ladies approached her. Pierre held his lady's hand tightly for her confidence. The woman herself behaved confidently and steadfastly. Without standing with the girls for long, the princess decided to go into the hall first. They looked at her with the same hateful gaze. The leader among the group of aristocrats sighed loudly after Irene. She began to playfully say that the lady had come to the ball not with Frederick, but with a completely different man. The ladies laughed because the first lady did not hold the title of crown princess and decided to become a countess. The soldier already wanted to return to the envious women. Irene held her companion with a straight back and a calm expression on her face. The girl already knew how to take revenge on the nasty girls from the aristocratic faction. She slowly turned around, tapped her heels on the tiles, and walked up to the gossip girls. I asked if the misses had talked about her. The main one feigned embarrassment. She said that she did not think that the words would reach Lady Chandler. The red-haired girl took a closer look at the nastiest of the gang of aristocrats. Her face was very familiar. All that remained was to remember where the girl knew the brown-haired woman from. A picture from an event in the large royal garden popped into my head. Then a girl followed her and Derek, looking rather angry. The girl's family was simple, lived outside the city, and recently moved to the center, having bought a small estate. The girl dreamed of improving her status as a commoner, and did the unthinkable in front of His Majesty. It was as if she accidentally spilled red wine on herself right in front of the couple. In such a feigned manner, she tenderly apologized to the crown prince for being careless. Having walked 2 steps away from the girl, Irenia repeated the act, stumbling. Frederick picked up the fragile body of his companion. Both blushed, looking into each other's eyes. The red-haired girl hastened to apologize for her clumsiness, but continued to walk with the air on her arm. Then the enmity began between 2 girls of very distant statuses from each other. Naturally, Irene did not hesitate to mention this incident to the girls' friends. Out of shame and anger, the simpleton blushed even more actively, waving her fan. She did not expect such a daring answer from the Rose of the Empire. People around heard the entire squabble between the ladies, and began to heatedly discuss the behavior of the new girl among the aristocrats. Pierre sat behind in shock. The man did not expect such strength and confidence from the seemingly fragile lady. However, the red-haired girl did not think about finishing yet. The brown-haired woman had to answer for her insolence. The girl came closer to the princess. She apologized for the incidents that happened in the past. She asked me not to raise this topic again. Irenia just smiled slyly. She did not at all want to humiliate others and show her superiority. It was just a matter of putting arrogant people in their place. The aristocrat laughed again. Turning to her friends, she said that she could afford that dress many more times. Miss didn't like it when someone boasted about money, especially those people who actually didn't have any. The lady chuckled. The other girls weakly agreed with the simpleton. However, that was not all. Irene asked if the girl really lived in great luxury, as she told her circle of high society. The red-haired one continued the topic. She said that it was unlikely that the brown-haired woman would have been able to buy a new dress, because the designers were already aware. The girl turned sharply to my lady. She asked what she meant when she spoke about tailors. It just so happened that at that time the princess was working with the designers of the new girl's dress. and she couldn't remain silent about how their client was ruining precious works. As a result, the girls' outfits could no longer be sold. After examining the guest from head to toe, the daughter of Duke Chandler rendered a verdict that the dress was not from the capital at all. Irinia waved her fan theatrically. The face of the previously daring girl showed horror and confusion. The friends came out from behind the brown-haired woman. They asked whether the Rose of the Empire treated them, simple aristocrats, too cruelly. When asked what kind of family the defenders were from, they only remained silent and turned away. Everyone knew that Irene's offenders had an extremely bad life. Both brothers and father stood like a wall to protect the youngest of the family. Pierre leaned towards his companion's ear. He offered to continue their evening without the annoying ladies. Having said goodbye, the princess went first to the banquet hall. The blonde held Miss by the waist as he entered the center of the event. Irinia was already drinking her second glass of wine that evening. The soldier was not distracted by food and drink, vigilantly watching his lady. He suggested that the duke's daughter replace the wine with lemon juice. This surprised the girl. She asked why Sylvian wanted this so much. The girl deftly dodged the soldier's hand. She asked if he wanted to take advantage of Mrs. Intoxication and take her hand. Pierre blushed. He asked me not to joke about him like that anymore. Milady smiled at her old friend and laughed with him. Leaving with a glass, the young man said that earlier, when his friend was drunk, she talked about the same things and touching between them. To him it was nonsense and something that should not have happened. These words made Irene think. Why did the knight so not want to talk about something intimate with her? And why did he run away after the words of his companion? Pierre's sister appeared behind him. The same girl who should have become crown princess according to the faction. Noticing the Rose of the Empire, the blonde's smile faded. The girl apologized for not noticing his brother was his lady. The commander asked the ladies to wait for him and quickly got lost in the crowd. The girls were left alone. Hiding her face behind her glass, the red-haired girl thought about Lyra standing next to her. Surely, she believed, just like other aristocrats, that Lady Chandler stood in her way. The girl looked confused and scared. It seemed that the miss was not in the hall but far away in her thoughts. Irene decided to be the first to start a conversation. She said that the blonde was probably very lucky to have a brother like Pierre. The lady's hands suddenly became covered with red spots. Unable to contain herself, Lyra began to comb them. Irinia asked what happened to the girl and whether she needed help. Miss waved it off. This often happened to her because of nerves. She just thought about it and was scared by the princess's sharp voice. Milady started a casual conversation. The blonde turned out to be a very nice companion. Irene asked a question about Pierre. She heard that many ladies were in love with him. Was it true, and did he like someone? Frederick Reiferger watched the princess from afar. As luck would have it, Miss stood right in front of him and seemed to be showing off herself. Lyra giggled. The girl did not expect what could be discussed with the most enviable beauty of her brother's empire. Irinia raised her glass. She offered to talk to the girl more in the future and become closer. Previously, due to lack of time, the lady did not have the right moment to meet. Miss nodded understandingly. I sympathized with the princess because I had already heard about her and the crown prince. The red-haired girl felt funny. Lyra, like everyone else, thought that she was madly in love with Derek, but left because of the well-known character of the prince. However, the girl showed herself to be a completely different person. She said that you should never be ashamed of feelings and emotions, even if they were not reciprocated. The blonde moved closer to Irene's ear. Covering her mouth with her hand, she whispered that she was sure that the princess would become Frederick's chosen one. When asked why he had to choose her and not Pierre's sister, the girl simply replied that the future king was never interested in her. Unlike Irinia, the ruler's son did not take his eyes off her all evening. Miss smiled. It was funny to watch how the prince tried to read her himself like an X-ray. I couldn't help but notice the brunette's outfit. Even on holidays he came in his usual uniform, however, not today. The young man was wearing formal clothes. Jacket with medals, embroidered with gold and small rubies. Lady Chandler chuckled. Did the young man really want to attract someone's attention to himself? Why did he need this? Lyra turned pink at her words. She said that the heir probably couldn't wait for the official part of the evening in which he would propose to the lady. Irene hastened to turn the topic in the right direction. She said that the girls were standing nearby, and Derek was probably looking at her, Lyra, and not at the red-haired one. Even then, the Rose of the Empire was watching Frederick. She saw the couple walking in the garden, and the crown prince gave the blonde a small box. Then the duke's youngest daughter rejected the gift. At that moment, Irenaea came out from behind the bushes, giving an expression of sincere surprise at the sight of His Majesty. The brunette smiled at his friend and handed her the box. This is how the beauty acquired new gems in her collection. Such a gesture felt like a handout to a beggar. And this was always repeated when the ladies did not accept gifts from Frederick. In order to seduce a guy, you had to accept the gift with a particularly happy look. Despite the fact that initially the thing was for a completely different person, the gem was the size of a finger. It shone and shimmered in the sun like a drop of honey. Then Lyra smiled happily and almost clapped her hands. Only at that moment Irenaea did not understand why the blonde was happy. That same evening, Miss gave the stone to her maid, Eve. She was very happy and accepted the gift with great pleasure. Therefore, if Derek looked at her, he would only mourn the loss of a strong family for his family. He definitely needed a girl with a strong-willed, collected, and strong character. Lyra did not fit this image. Pierre came up from behind. He frightened her with a sharp touch on the lady's shoulder. The sister smiled joyfully when her brother arrived. In the knight's second hand was a plate of caramelized fruit, cherry cakes, and cookies. The girl bowed and went to her partner because the dancing was going to start very soon. Irene waved to her distant sister with a smile. Taking a closer look at the saucer, Miss realized that each chosen dish was her favorite of the entire selection in the banquet hall. Sylvian admitted that he remembered this even on the day when the Chandler family arrived at the Duke's house. Then the guy paid special attention to what my lady was choosing for herself. Irenaea's cheeks turned red. This attitude was very pleasant and caused a warm feeling in the chest. The blonde himself was embarrassed. He wanted to please the princess, as a result of which the miss was delighted with the young man's manners. Unlike him, Derek was never interested in Irene's tastes. What she liked to do and where her favorite place to read was, he also didn't know. Hiding her smile behind her glass, the red-haired woman said that she understood why love letters were sent to the 7th Nightly Squad every day. The princess liked it when emotions were read on the faces of her interlocutors. In Frederick's case, he seemed to have no feelings at all. Standing with her back to her companion, the girl said in a languid voice that the evening was wonderful only because of the presence of Pierre next to her. After standing for a minute, the young man came closer to the girl and turned her to face him. With hope, he asked whether these words really hinted at a second chance for the young man. The red-haired woman came close to her companion and pressed her whole body against him. Maintaining eye contact, she took a cookie from the plate. Flirtatiously, not wanting to answer directly, she invited the blonde to try her favorite sweet. Before the commander had time to take a bite, the prince's voice came from behind. There was metallic anger in the voice. Not paying attention, Irenaea continued to hold the bitten dessert in her hands and shook the crumbs off the soldier's shirt. Pierre was about to swallow the crumbs as quickly as possible, but nearly choking, he began to chew more slowly. The views of all the guests immediately turned to the trio in the center of the hall. Love triangles have always interested people more than healthy relationships. Unfortunately, amber eyes slid over the prince's face. Why couldn't he sit on the throne and rushed up to the couple? What was the reason for the brunette's anger, other than the fact that the red-haired woman did not pay attention to him? The girl did not understand what right a man had to interrupt their evening and express his own dissatisfaction without being someone for the young couple. Miss did not want to deal with the prince, so without hesitation she brought the strawberry to her companion's lips. He, having a personal feud with the future ruler, leaned over with a grin and ate the berry from the lady's hands. It was clear from Frederick's face that he was angry and definitely wanted to take revenge on the impudent couple. Coming closer, he muttered almost in a whisper, so that the princess would not pretend that she had not heard her master's address. Brushing away her cherry strands, Lady Chandler replied that she was simply no longer submitting to the brunette's authority. Sighing, she recalled that she couldn't read minds, which is why she didn't understand when the man woke up and approached them. As soon as Derek wanted to start a quarrel in a raised tone, Pierre covered the girl with himself. He said that there was no need to start a conflict in public. Mrs. Eyes sparkled. She was extremely pleased that the young man stood up for his companion, flashed his violet eyes. He asked me to warn him in future if he suddenly wants to borrow a lady. Given Irene's wishes, the partner could not allow Prince Derek to leave the hall with Miss. It was as if a thunderstorm had broken out between the men. Irenaea wondered what else happened between the guys that she herself didn't know. Judging by the faces of the young people, they were only too happy to spoil each other's evening. The red-haired woman stood between the soldiers. It was impossible to let them fight. It would not only ruin Mrs. Evening, but also glorify her face as the lady for whom the aristocrats fought. She asked His Majesty to pay attention to the fact that the princess's chosen one was still Pierre Sylvain. If the crown prince needed to speak to Milady, he should have waited until the end of the evening. Moreover, this was Irinia's first experience of holding a ball not with a family member, but with a friend from another kingdom. After all, the person with whom the girl wanted to be together rejected her feelings. There was no choice left. Not in his own voice, Frederick asked what the guest wanted. Was it just dancing or something else? The woman nodded. She really came for the dance, however, since she had a soldier with her. There was no need to worry about it. With a smile on their faces, the couple walked away from the air. One of Lady Chandler's favorite songs started playing and the young people were ready to start dancing. Pierre's eyes shone. Perhaps he lied about the fact that he also liked music. But his attention and care around the Rose of the Empire was pleasant. Derek clenched his fists and ground his teeth in anger. The couple was disgustingly sweet and too nice to each other. With a jerk, the brunette covered the distance between them. Stuck between two, he thought it right for Irene to dance with him first. The young people turned around, and the aristocrats around them repeated the gesture. Once, during a similar event, a man clearly refused to dance with Lady Chandler. Moreover, he avoided her the rest of the evening. Then those around her felt sorry for her. The guys abandoned their companions and offered to entertain the princess. After a while, the brunette himself broke down and demanded to spend time with the Rose of the Empire. This pleased the pride of the Duke's daughter. One of the assumptions was that the prince did not like the commander of the 7th Knightly Detachment. Irinia still did not need to be in the company of a man with whom she had swapped bodies without mutual consent. Moreover, the heir could ask again about what happened. I didn't want to lie anymore. After politely apologizing, Madame explained that she had already promised the first dance to her partner. Derek continued to get angry. I couldn't understand why the girl stopped listening to him completely. The aristocrats covered their faces with fans and whispered behind the backs of the trio. Rumors cannot get around this event. Sighing, the prince silently turned around and walked away. However, behind him remained an invisible spirit that his anger would still be reflected on one of them. Afterwards, Miss bowed in a curtsy and thanked His Majesty for his understanding. As she left, Irene thought that the future ruler had too high self-esteem and exaggerated expectations from others. Couples swirled around the live music. Candles gave the atmosphere in the hall a special intimacy. Their first dance was worth starting with slow movements in order to feel each other in motion. Pierre blushed. This made Irinia laugh. The young man was extremely sweet when he was embarrassed by his own words. Step second, third. The couple moved to the beat of the music. Nothing seemed to exist except their eye contact. As the princess expected, the captain danced wonderfully and led her along. The surrounding soldiers were talking among themselves. The Rose of the Empire rejected the crown prince and danced with the knight. It was a big sensation for everyone. People stopped their dancing and watched the new couple. Mr. Sylvain and his companion Miss Chandler attracted the attention of the guests. Prince Derek stood to the side and drank champagne. It was impossible to just stand and look at the couple, but the man could not take his eyes off them. Irene smiled to herself. She made everyone believe that she had found a new chosen one and forgot about the crown prince. The fanfare broke the calm atmosphere in the hall. The soldiers reported the arrival of Duke Cadion and his Grand Duchess. The redhead frowned. The same man who cursed Frederick 10 years ago passed in front of her. People marveled at the arrival of a respected member of the royal family. Despite his unclean origins, the aristocrats loved the man. His wife was wearing a light, airy green floor-length dress, a fan of the same color, and a hat with wide sides. The Duke himself wore a purple camisole, a burgundy shirt, and gray trousers. He was no match for the grace of Derek's image. Irinia pulled the guy along with her. They needed to take a closer look at the newly arrived guests. From afar, the man noticed the prince standing away from everyone with a glass of white wine. Before reaching the young man, he opened his arms as if for a hug. He loudly expressed his joy at meeting his nephew. With an imposing gait, the king's half-brother approached the brunette. With a bit of irony, he asked if he was used to life in the bustling capital of aristocrats. The young man replied with no less sarcasm that, as a child of a king, he quickly mastered the way of the city. Unlike a man from a small town on the outskirts, the Duke moved his mustache with displeasure and took a glass of champagne from the servant, silently raising it in front of the prince's face. He took a sip, grinning maliciously. Frederick made a remark to the guest's companion. He assumed that she had nails in her neck. Otherwise, why had she never bowed to the crown prince? Irenia gloatingly tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. The faction was probably very angry with its representative. While the woman bowed without much enthusiasm, Kadion asked if it was true what they said about his brother promoting national marriage. The plan of the evil duke was revealed. He wanted to exchange the bodies of the soul of his candidate and Frederick. The brunette continued to say that he was worried about the fate of his nephew, because if he was left alone, the kingdom might not wait for the next heir. Not wanting to listen any further, Derek pointed his finger at Irene. He had a candidate for the first dance with a young man. Irenia took a menacing pose. It was wrong for the guy to set her up like that. Moreover, she and he had no intention of touching each other. The situation was extremely difficult. If you refuse the miss now, a lady from the faction will immediately take her place. However, if she agreed, she would be betraying her family and the royal family with which they lived side by side. This was the prince's character. He silently released the couple, knowing that in any case he would achieve his goal. The brunette came up and extended his hand in a leather black glove. He suggested we dance together. With obvious hatred in his eyes, Pierre turned away and was already thinking about where he could go during their dance. Irenia, playing the role of the duke's diligent daughter, accepted the crown prince's hand and bowed in a curtsy. Taking his hand, the girl pressed her nails into the young man's palm and continued to smile with her signature smile. In a whisper, Derek asked if Lady Chandler was so unpleasant dancing with him. Smiling at those around her, she also quietly replied that earlier the man himself had refused to dance with her. Now he made scenes in front of the public. This was unacceptable and not necessary for a lady of decent society with a good reputation. Smiling sadly, the young man asked if the princess blamed him for her past actions together. Walking along the carpet, the red-haired woman recalled how Frederick once hated touching her pale skin and fragile body. At these words, the prince stopped, despite the fact that the lady pulled him further. As if the child was stubborn in place, he protested, denying that he had ever disdained touching Madame. This surprised Irene. After all, it was Derek who was against dancing, reading together and walking with the princess. Looking down, the beauty replied that she was able to understand at what moments people loved her, and at what times they avoided and hated her. The heir was even more taken aback. He asked why Milady got the idea that he hated her. Irenia's cheeks turned red. She recalled that every time she wanted to spend time with him, the brunette pushed the girl away like an annoying fly. Now it was the crown prince's turn to blush. After all, the guy avoided and was afraid not at all because he hated, but on the contrary. The music started playing. It was time for the main couple of the evening to start dancing to lead the rest of the guests. The young people held hands. The young man's warm palm lay on Irene's waist. Step by step, timidly, the two began to dance. They looked quite harmonious. The girl's fragile figure looked graceful against the backdrop of the muscular and strong body of the king's heir. The feeling of a hand on my waist was completely different from Pierre's touch. As it turned out, Miss blushed very red. Smiling, the prince asked what his companion was thinking about. Out of anger, Irene stepped on her partner's foot. Derek couldn't help but remark, because when dancing with Sylvian, no one stepped on anyone's feet. Smiling maliciously, the woman said that the commander's skill in dancing was at the highest level, because he skillfully led the girl behind him and did not allow her to step on his feet. He leaned the girl over and whispered in her ear that it was very rude to mention another man in a conversation with a partner. From that moment on, the prince allowed Lady Chandler to look only at him, lean on and listen only to him. The girl was afraid of Derek's attitude. He had never been like this before. What happened to the guy during this time? Miss did not understand. Laughing, she asked why the young prince did not think about Pierre's interests, Irenia's legal companion this evening. The young man snorted with excessive aggression. He said that he considered Sylvian not qualified enough to be a commander. Because of this, allegedly, he did not want the noble Lady Chandler to come to the evening with a loser. Irenia was amazed, which is why the king's son called her chosen one for the evening so cruelly. She suggested that perhaps the prince reacted this way to how tenderly the couple communicated in private. Derek smiled bitterly as he continued to lead the lady. He reproached her for the fact that the princess had never fed him before, even on that very day. Irene smiled slyly at the presenter. She said that he wasn't the only one who could hate people for their actions. The red-haired one was no slouch either. She admitted that she fed Mr. Sylvian only because his hands were busy with the plate, for the convenience of my lady herself. Frederick squeezed the lady's hand a little tighter. Through his teeth, he said that she was in a hurry to forget about him. Because of the music, Irenia did not hear what the prince was saying about the last freedom. I asked again. A grin cut the brunette's cute face. He promised that as soon as he found out how and why the woman took his body, he would immediately take the princess's freedom underwater. The red-haired woman was even glad that Frederick Reiferger finally spoke about it. The topic hung over them all evening like a cloud, and fortunately dissipated. Continuing to dance beautifully, the young miss pretended that she did not understand what charms the young man was talking about. She repeated again that she herself did not expect the couple to exchange shells with each other. The man recalled that sooner or later he would have gotten to the truth. However, the offer to make Irene crown princess was still valid. Again, I had to repeat to the guy that Miss did not want to become the prince's wife at all. The song is over. Irenia curtsied. The brunette still didn't want to let go of the girl he really liked, but who was terribly annoying with her character. Loud applause rang out all around. As it turned out, people surrounded the place where the main couple danced and watched them. Miss giggled. Surely Duke Chandler was proud of his daughter, who as always was the center of attention. The man actively communicated with other aristocrats. They talked too loudly about what a wonderful empress Irenia would become. Elderly guests remembered Duchess Chandler in her youth, a young pink-haired beauty who won the hearts of all men. The emperor himself approached his son and his partner. Irene immediately bowed deeply, not forgetting to kiss the empress's hand. The ruler was kind to Miss Chandler. He offered to have dinner at the palace with him and the rest of the royal family. The wife supported her husband. They were always happy to see the princess in her free time. Besides, with new responsibilities, Miss would hardly have time for dinner. While the girl was in ecstasy from communicating with the king and queen themselves, the brain was desperately trying to shout to Irene's heart. After all, the first spouses in the country behaved so nicely because they believed in the speedy emergence of the duke's daughter as the crown princess. However, even if the Miss did not intend to become Derek's wife, it was impossible to refuse the king's invitation. Full moon. The night was full of light and seemed to support the festive mood of the castle guests. Pierre had been looking for his companion for 20 minutes. I walked around the entire large hall and decided to go up to the second floor. Indeed, on the balcony stood a lonely red-haired girl, who was so different from the others that it was impossible not to notice her. The blonde smiled and approached his lady. He leaned on the railing to the right of the beauty. Her hair was already disheveled, and her perfect makeup had become smeared. The lady immediately admitted that she was already drunk and wanted to return home. The soldier decided to go out into the fresh air. At the end of the corridor there were doors leading to the balcony. To keep the woman from freezing, the commander took off his cloak and threw it over the shoulders of the young lady sitting on the chair. Pierre immediately went to his lady for water. She was embarrassed. The girl liked it when the soldier was so caring and sweet. Irenia was especially pleased that the blonde was not angry for dancing with the prince and talking with his family. Smiling, the young man went down to the first floor, holding the railing and thinking about what kind of water would have a better effect on Mrs. Body. The most important thing is that his companion did not know how much the young man had to go through for her indulgence. Pierre sincerely wanted to confess to the red-haired girl about his desires, about his dreams with her, about the lady, about their future. He was flattered by the sexually suggestive jokes and the drunken, favorable mood of his lady, however. For the sake of decency, the young man ignored them. Judging by all the compliments during the evening, the woman liked the appearance of the commander and the way he behaved. But my lady had no idea how long the blonde had been selecting an image especially for her, and how much he had asked his friends about Irene's favorite dishes, smells, and drinks. Absorbed in thoughts and a plan to win the heart of the princess, Pierre almost missed the conversation of the people under the steps. Already familiar girls from the faction were sitting at the table. Quite heavily intoxicated, the chief among them was indignant at how nicely Irenia chatted with the emperor himself. The flushed girl was enviously glad that after the night on the island, the couple no longer spent so much time together. The noblewomen were amused by how most likely the very rose of the empire was killed by its collapse before the future ruler. Pierre quietly approached their table, resting his hands on the edge. He asked whether the brown-haired woman was the same daughter of Viscount Alta. Out of surprise, the girl began to stutter. She barely said that she was her. Pierre smiled coldly, squeezing the glass in his hand. Out of fear of the man, the brunette bent to her knees and began to breathe rapidly. The blonde calmly suggested that the girl should not overact. Everyone understood what the conversation was about, and about the consequences of loud drunken swearing by an ill-mannered guest. Pierre was angry. What if the girl's obscene words were heard by others? No one would have escaped the rumors then. The evil noblewoman turned to the commander. She asked why he himself was better if in the same way, for the sake of his own goals, he wanted to be with the most beautiful girl in the empire. She jumped up and wanted to say something else, but the young man's icy gaze stopped her with her mouth open. The eyes made it clear that the girl had crossed the line. In a barely audible voice, the knight, smiling, asked if the envious people really didn't understand who they were discussing. Irene was a sparkling snake, the offspring of dragons, and he, Pierre Sylvian, was fascinated by her. Only because of this, the guy was not mistaken in his actions. Some of these words scared the brunette, and she backed away. She began to scream that the commander of the knightly detachment had gone crazy, was out of his mind. The young ladies sitting a little further away asked why Lady Viscount behaved so defiantly. Before the brown-haired woman had time to turn away, water from the young man's glass splashed into her face. The noblewoman screamed about the inappropriate behavior of the guest and pointed out to all passers-by her wet face and the empty glass in the hands of the blonde. One of the aristocrats asked how such a respected man could act so low and spill water on a lady. Pierre sighed exaggeratedly. With extreme disappointment in himself, he apologized to the lady for his awkwardness. The girl immediately became embarrassed and transferred the blame to herself and her drunken state. This made the guy happy. Having confirmed the version, he specially said loudly that people under the steward were often more energetic than in ordinary life. Openly mocking, the guy handed the girl a handkerchief so that she would not catch a cold in the wind in wet clothes. The aristocrats, of course, took Pierre's place. They were outraged by Lady Alt's behavior, because the man apologized to her and even helped her. Irene watched this. She was pleased with her partner's action. Now the girl would never spread rumors about the princess. The guy, who was supported by the empire and the aristocracy faction, was not afraid of the noblewoman. Therefore, without worrying that he would tarnish his reputation, he stood up for the lady. Having admired the handsome man, Irenia realized that the commander of the 7th Detachment of the Knightly Guard was ideal for her. Pierre returned 5 minutes after the end of the skirmish. He apologized for being late, leaving his companion alone. There were 3 glasses of water on the tray, with ice, warm and at room temperature. The redhead smiled, what the soldier was not ready to do in order to capture the princess's heart. Having chosen warm water, the woman drank a little. She asked if the guy took care of the purity of rumors after the clash with the noblewoman. Blushing, the young man walked away a few steps, placing the tray of water on the railing. The blonde said something barely audible about how the girls didn't get along with each other, and the guy decided to sort it out. Amber eyes scanned the soldier's behavior. Now the knight looked like a scolded child. The girl looked at the man contentedly. After a long conversation with Derek, she was completely unaccustomed to the emotions of normal young people. After Irene expressed her gratitude for her support, Sylvian seemed to blossom. He promised to make the lady happy every day of his life. He offered to come together to Lyra's tea party. This could strengthen their relationship in society. Lady Chandler happily agreed. She admitted that she would willingly call Lyra sister. The soldier was sincerely glad that the Rose of the Empire accepted his humble invitation to come to his castle. After standing together a little longer, Irenia asked to be left alone before meeting with the other ladies downstairs. Pierre went down to the garden. He walked far enough not to be seen and jumped for joy. It seemed that the whole evening with the Duke's daughter had been a dream. However, one person did see him. The red-haired woman stood leaning on her hand and watched the young man's raging emotions. She liked to see how the guy genuinely enjoyed being around her. Previously, Miss had never accepted an invitation immediately, leaving the intrigue until the end. However, tonight, Pierre was an exception. My thoughts were already occupied by the tea party at my companion's sister. For some reason, this ordinary event gave me goosebumps. Derek began to choke. It was painful to breathe and even worse to exhale. The Marquis ran up trying to help the prince. However, everything happened very quickly and unexpectedly. The couple's bodies swapped each other again. Frederick, in Irene's body, felt his hair and looked around. How this was possible was the only question in both of their minds. The prince stood aggressively and looked at Lady Chandler's back. This should not have happened again. The spell was lifted after the potion. Irenia could not make a mistake in preparing the antidote. Everything went according to the rules. Only now the couple swapped bodies without even touching. Perhaps the curse could have been changed. But who needed it if no one knew that the couple was already in an exchange? Frederick asked the Marquise to leave him and Irene alone. There was an important conversation ahead. Having drawn the pink curtain, the couple met menacing glances. At the same time, they asked each other questions without lowering their tone. "What's happening?" the prince shouted. "Why did we switch bodies again?" Irene answered the riddle. The girl in the guy's body looked like a little boy about to cry. They weren't meant to be each other again. Derek in the lady's body, on the contrary, looked even angrier. The heir believed that Miss Chandler was to blame for everything. Irene got angry and took off her cloak from her dress uniform. "I wanted to show His Majesty's behavior as if in a mirror." And so they became enemies again. The curse worked again, and now the conversation could certainly not be avoided. The couple stood in silence for 5 minutes. Frederick leaned on the railing and began to freeze because of his open-shoulder dress. The girl was thinking that there was no time to waste playing games of silence. But it was also impossible to tell everything to the crown prince. One thought was still in the lady's head. Perhaps, after spending that night together, the couple overdid it with emotions. In this case, there was only one way out. Another night spent together with a softer outcome. Coming closer, the woman wanted to try another method, touching her body with Derek's consciousness. The man began to comically push away from the hands, not allowing himself to be touched. Last time, a small touch immediately changed their places. Taking the young man by the hand, the couple did not feel anything. The spell didn't work in reverse. Then all the easy paths passed by the problem of the damned couple. Irene began to walk from side to side on the balcony. The couple could try to hug or merge in a kiss. That is, it meant putting feelings into touch. From such thoughts, Irinea in the prince's body blushed and began to breathe heavily. It was wrong to think about your own body in that way. Frederick did not understand anything at all. The girl took and then let go of his hand. He kept asking questions about what it all meant. After standing holding hands for 2 minutes, the souls returned to their bodies. The real crown prince jumped back. Frightened, he asked how the princess knew how to properly return to their bodies. Irinea lied that because of stress she simply held his hand and they became themselves again. Before the heir could shout at the red-haired girl, the girl pressed herself crying to his strong chest. She quickly rattled off that the last time they spent the night together, they swapped bodies. Before Reiferger accused the lady of finding another man, the woman managed to say that they only had conversations, at a distance and without touching. The conversation turned in a completely different direction, and instead of a problem, the couple began to vigorously and loudly discuss their bed. Both were flushed and stood with their foreheads almost touching. I remembered their dialogue before that very night on the island. Then the future king said that he only needed Irene's body. Once upon a time, the lady believed that the prince had long been an experienced man. My shoulder hurt. The bruises had almost disappeared, leaving behind yellow spots. However, now, hearing the ragged breathing and rapid heartbeat, one could believe that the lady really was His Majesty's first. Irinea shook her head. In this case, sexual intercourse with anyone was not involved in their transformation. Frederick nodded. There had to be some other reason, something else that could have caused this to happen. The prince asked to speak more quietly. Surely the old marquise was somewhere nearby. Loud words could attract him or other listeners. He suggested we meet the next night at the Blue Castle. There, the couple could privately discuss all the details of their common grief. The Blue Castle was actually a hotel, the largest and most luxurious in the capital. The emperor himself ran it. Derek's father's private hotel was the perfect place for a secret meeting. The people there were trusted and reliable. The young man took Irene by the hands. Their lives changed dramatically after that day on the island. The couple could no longer remain strangers, if only because of what happened a few minutes ago with their bodies. Blushing, he gathered his courage. The girl looked at the brunette in bewilderment, not understanding where he was leading. Frederick blurted out that they needed to sleep again in order to return to the countdown point of their curse. The next morning, the girl woke up in her chambers. I immediately remembered the sensations during the exchange of bodies with the prince. Ava brought water for the mistress to wash. The next day after the transformation was no longer as difficult as the first time. Frederick was haunted by the thought that perhaps after one more night spent together, Miss would change her mind about leaving him. This idea was especially prompted by the tea with an aphrodisiac that Irene took for 2 weeks in a row. This time the couple was ready to save each other and make everything right. Now the couple understood approximately what the problem was. Before the big night, Derek sat in the princess's body and looked at his face in the mirror. I couldn't stop looking at the facial features of the Rose of the Empire. The maid entered the room at that moment. She asked why the lady was looking at her reflection again. The prince lied that he was worried about the condition of his skin and looked at every centimeter of his face. Ava hastened to assure the girl that there was nothing to worry about. and the noble oils from the healers helped keep the lady's skin toned. Since the lady was talking about health, the maid just reminded her of her meeting with Mr. Killian, who had several questions for my lady. The prince quickly realized who they were talking about. The same boy with the precious stones who interrupted their last conversation in the garden. The guy wondered whether it was worth canceling the meeting with the jeweler, or whether he wanted to look inside Irene's life. Having made a decision, the girl sent a maid to let the guest into the hall. The blonde entered the room. Derek didn't know how to behave in the red-haired body, so he simply froze looking at the guest. The boy laughed. He asked what surprised his sister so much. The heir was amazed at such close communication with an ordinary merchant. The boy's gray eyes indicated that he was a hybrid from a country enemy to them. Derek couldn't mistake anything for those eyes. If Killian was indeed a wizard, this could play an important role in how the transformations are connected to the prince himself and Irenia. Perhaps this boy was one of those people who helped the princess learn about the body swap spell. Many thoughts swarmed in the young man's head. Very little came together. Remembering the lady's manner of communication, he quickly sat down with his legs crossed. He replied that there was nothing more than a short glance. He directly asked why Killian had come and what was new with him. The thief's eyes immediately lit up with fire. There was new news about Duke Cadion. This surprised Derek. Whatever, but he wasn't ready to hear about that. Right after the ball at night, he sent an envoy to the Kingdom of Wizards. He said that his spies were now monitoring the developments on the other side of the river. While he had the opportunity, Frederick wanted to find out more about his father's half-brother. When asked why the guy delayed the news for 12 whole hours, he turned away in embarrassment. He answered that in addition to how to get truthful information, he also needed to worry about the safety of himself and people. In response, the blonde mentioned Triple Street, the same main shopping street known throughout the country. If Killian lived and ruled there, then the prince roughly understood what Irene wanted from the thief. Suddenly, the boy knelt down and laid his head on her lap. The prince was taken aback and pulled his hand away from his own leg. After the request to pat the scout on the head, the man boiled. The relationship between his lady and the hybrid was extremely strange. The bloodhound's eyes looked like those of a hungry cat begging for a treat from its owner. This is approximately how it actually happened. The prince immediately introduced a couple of this. Hopefully an adult, a boy and a luxurious lady. Without waiting for a second request, Frederick asked Killian to leave the castle if all his information was exhausted. Dressed in the camouflage suit of a crazy guy and hiding his tears with glasses, the young man hurried to leave Irene's chambers. The crown prince rubbed his forehead with his palm. It was hard to imagine what else the seemingly luxurious life of Irenia Chandler hid. The night fell on the city with a pleasant coolness, bringing peace and relaxation in the form of sleep to the people. The windows of the hotel at the palace shone with the warm light of the lanterns at the windows. The atmosphere was created cozy and comfortable for a walk along the embankment. A man in a black cloak handed the administrator a golden ticket to enter the hotel's VIP room. After examining the map, the man nodded and asked the brunette to follow him to special rooms for special guests. Irenia, in the body of the crown prince, ascended to the 5th floor. Everything went smoothly as Derek himself promised. The main problem remained the same. The girl did not understand how she could get rid of the curse once and for all. Meanwhile, the footman had already brought her to the desired number. The doors alone already looked luxurious and expensive. Opening the door, Irene saw her body, and with it Frederick's gaze. Their night was beginning. If Miss had to be honest, this time the anticipation in her was much stronger than the first time. The night was to be decisive. The couple was ready to invest all their strength and resources in order to no longer suffer from a mutual curse. The couple stood by candlelight. Irene asked what interesting things happened during the whole day at the Duke's estate. The prince stood his ground. He asked her to tell Miss every little detail that the princess knew about their curse. The girl in the brunette's body kept repeating that all she knew was that if the crown prince slept with another woman, he would switch bodies with her again. The guy silently leaned his back against the man's chest. Irenia had the opportunity to feel her own body and smell. The young people's hands intertwined. Breathing synchronized, and the couple seemed to become one organism. A moment and Irene returned to her body again. One touch filled with feelings returned everything to its place. Derek gently hugged the red-haired girl's fragile body to himself. He asked why she thought that the prince would need another girl. The girl's cheeks turned red. The brunette's voice really sounded offended at such a stupid idea from his companion. No matter how long the young people stood holding hands, the problem was not solved on its own. The lady's thoughts were occupied by the fact that she was tired of standing for a long time with Frederick. However, for her it was better than looking into each other's eyes. Blue-Eyed asked what the princess wanted from their second night. Lady Chandler shook her head. She didn't want to demand anything from the guy and didn't think of placing any special hopes. The young man smiled. I wanted to ask only one thing from my companion, so that she calls her partner by name. Another request escaped his lips. The brunette squeezed his shoulder and asked him not to leave until he woke up. The red-haired girl thought about it. Why did the prince ask for such intimate things? However, for the sake of lifting the curse, even this could be tolerated. She looked at her companion with the cutest cat eyes. She asked me to tell her all my wishes and she could fulfill them. In a whisper, Frederick said that he did not want to ask for anything more and kissed the beauty. Gentle kisses and hot touches gave her goosebumps. This time the guy was bolder than the first. Amber eyes tried to scan the young man's face. The girl did not understand what the prince wanted and what was on his mind. She abruptly pushed the young man away, breaking the kiss. She asked if her partner had forgotten anything. He nodded and reached for the box of pills. The red-haired woman noted that he was not the least bit ashamed of his forgetfulness. The young man prepared special pills that would make it possible not to get pregnant, even from the slightest grain of a pill. After chewing the pill, he again merged into kisses with Irinia. I didn't want her to worry and act awkwardly around him. The candles pleasantly enveloped the room in the smell of sweet wax and living fire. The couple lay on the sheets, crushing them, warming the cold silk with the warmth of their bodies. The guy loomed over Irene. His cheeks turned red, his eyes opened wider, and his pupils dilated. The young man asked to call him by name. Such affectionate, simple treatment created a comfortable and trusting atmosphere between the couple. Almost in a whisper, Miss called him by name and pulled him by the neck to her dry lips from frequent breathing. The moon illuminated the room filled with romance and feelings of two young people who were already asleep. The difference that they were not a couple was immediately noticeable. After a night together, everyone slept in their own half without touching their bodies again. Frederick stood up first. He sat down on the bed, rustling the blanket. He ran his fingers through his hair, remembering pleasant moments with the lady sleeping next to him. On the shoulder that looked out from under the blanket, red marks of the brunette's strong fingers appeared. The guy hoped that the lady would agree to become crown princess. After all, he did everything he could to satisfy his partner. Even the medicine itself, which he prepared himself, showed that even at the wedding, young people did not have to immediately take care of the heirs. I imagined their wedding would become the largest event in the empire in the last 20 years. I was already thinking about how many children the couple would have. What would the babies be like? The wind blew pink tulle. Cool, fresh air illuminated the candlelit room. For an hour now, the prince had been watching the red-haired girl sleep and peacefully turn from side to side. Carefully, so as not to wake him, he reached out to touch Milady's silky crimson hair. I imagined how beautiful the bride's white veil would look on her bright hair. The girl would become the most beautiful in history. Derek really wanted Irene to be with him. The soft hair and character when the lady was in a good mood reminded him of the puppy that his mother once gave him. The only friend in captivity in a foreign country where everyone hated him. The boy spent all his time with the small red-haired baby. I stroked his big ears, ran with him, shared lunch and slept in his arms. The child always promised to protect his friend. A few days later, the puppy was poisoned. He whined and cried in pain while little Derek cried and tried to save him. Miss woke up. She stretched and asked what His Majesty was thinking about after sleep, also with an extremely serious look. Frederick noted to himself that the princess's sleepy voice sounded very pleasant, quiet, calm, and with a slight hoarseness. In the most affectionate voice, the young man replied that his companion reminded him of a dog from his childhood. Irenia was taken aback. She was not angered, but rather put into a stupor by the fact that she was compared to an animal. The prince quickly justified his words, saying that at that time he was his only friend and a wonderful, faithful fellow. Wanting to hit, Irene still squeezed out a smile. I asked if my partner loved dogs that much. She tucked her hair behind her ear. After saying that the crown prince's dog also had long hair, very pleasant to the touch. Frederick Reiferger has already dived into memories. He talked about who gave him the dog, what color the fur was, and how cute the bell on his collar was. Out of curiosity about what would happen next, I asked what the name of the future king's furry childhood friend was. He smiled bitterly and named him Waldo. That was the name of the 3-month-old puppy with red fur. The tailed one was the only source of joy, happiness, and warmth for a child in an enemy country. The day the dog died, the emotional side of Derek died too. He realized how important it is not to get attached to anyone, what pain once bright feelings can cause. To cheer up the young man, Miss complimented the dog's name. For the first time, Frederick was asked about Waldo, and indeed about his past, before becoming the crown prince and hero of the nation. The guy continued the sad story. On the prince's birthday, the puppy jumped onto the table and began to lap up the soup that was brought for the prisoner. Miss understood what happened next in the story. Surely it was hard for the young man to live with the thought that his only friend in the world had died for his sake. The girl held back her tears. The story really was terribly sad and unfair. Derek snorted. He didn't understand what upset the lady. Moreover, at that time he considered himself a weakling, since he could not protect not only himself, but also the smaller ones. The red-haired girl realized from the outburst of anger and harsh words of the young man that he missed Waldo, but the guy didn't want to show his weaknesses. I didn't want to completely open myself to someone else's view and opinion. His motto at that time was not how to save yourself and keep yourself from evil. Then he could not keep the most valuable thing during his life. This killed the crown prince even after several years. Nothing hurts more than the death of someone dear to a person. Irene wanted to cheer up the young man, said that in any case the dog died without regretting anything. Frederick turned around. I asked what my partner meant by saying these seemingly heartless words. She explained that the puppy's main task was to protect its owner and protect him, which is what the tiny friend did. For the young prince, Waldo was his whole world, and he wished him a long and happy life. The dog, on the other hand, wished for the safety of its owner and fulfilled its duty, despite the fact that it passed away very early. These words surprised the prince very much. Warmth and tenderness seemed to spread in my chest, not only to his dead friend but also to Irenia. Frederick sat up in bed again and crossed his arms. I thought about the princess's words and how deep her thoughts were. The brunette was very embarrassed by his revelation to the lady, but was also glad that she cared. After looking at the face of the future king for another moment, Irene smiled and again lay down with her back to him. Every time the young man heard the red-haired voice, he simply thought about it. Somewhere in the area of his heart there was a pleasant tingling sensation. It was a feeling he couldn't control. Moreover, I had never felt anything like this before. The girl touched something that she shouldn't have, something that the prince had been hiding for a long time. There was a tightness in my chest. The brunette thought that he needed to sleep until lunch to give the body a rest and the brain to filter what happened.